So, on D&D YouTube, we often talk about like general D&D advice for all kinds of players and all kinds of GMs. And I love that kind of advice, but it can sometimes lack that personal taste. Sometimes talking about something that like you personally feel passionate about can open up new ideas for people who hadn't thought about that thing before. And I think that that is really, really valuable. So today, in honor of my D&D game, House of Devils, reaching the back half, I wanted to reflect on things that my players do that I really love. These are things that you may not care about, but who knows? It could give you players out there some ideas on how to make your DM a real happy guy, because look, a happy DM, they just generally run a better game. And by the way, if you're here for some negative energy as well, don't worry, I balance this video out by having some things that past problem players have done that has earned my ire. So, without further ado guys, let's get started. Okay, let's start out with a love, and that is making a character with a unique aesthetic. I think we all have aesthetics in the back of our mind somewhere, but I want to hear it from you as the player. Tell me what your character looks like, what your character wears, their color palette, the trinkets that they have, etc., etc. It helps me so much as a dungeon master. I understand that not every DM commissions artwork regularly for their games. Like seriously, I commission a lot of artwork just because I love doing this. It's the coolest thing ever. I plan a whole video in the future about why commissioning artwork is so cool. But I don't think you need to commission stuff in order to appreciate the aesthetics of a character. I mean, we read books, right? I have had countless times where I'm reading something and the page pops in my head, fully visualized, because the author takes the time to describe what the character looks like. That's the wonderful thing about D&D. You don't need to worry about the video game having limited customization options or the television show that doesn't perfectly portray what you imagine the character looks like, because you are the person doing the imagining. It's all in your head. You can make your character look like whatever, so go wild, make something unique, make something cool, and then take the extra step and like write it down and tell me as the game master about it. I'm sure the vast majority of players have an idea of what their character looks like, but when it comes to actually like telling their DM about it, some people like falter right before that step, and that's a shame because I want to know about your character. I want to know as much as possible, and appearance to me is just as important as knowing their backstory or knowing how their voice sounds. Like, give them that aesthetic because it makes me all the more excited to run the game for them. It also helps that if you're playing with me, I'm probably gonna commission your character at some point, which if they look cool, it's only gonna make me all the happier. But anyway, tip number 2, and this one is a hate. I hate it when problem players assume that any bad thing that happens to their character is the end of the world. If you are coming here from the main channel, you have no doubt heard this refrain, but say it with me. Crispy's Tavern runs hard D&D combats and hard draw steel combats. And I mean, yeah, that's about it. Those are the 2 games I've played that have combat at all. So yeah, I run hard combats, and that means that bad things are going to happen to your character. For the most part, my players are happy with that. They are people who enjoy the challenge. However, I have played with problem players who really don't like it when their character hits 0 hit points. Like, they assume that means the end of the world. These players don't have any faith in me as the dungeon master because they just assume that I'm trying to kill them specifically. Like, the challenge of my combats is somehow something that is adversarial, not something I want them to overcome, which the latter is the case. I want you to win these fights. But no matter what my intentions are, some players are just going to yell at me and say, "This is impossible. How are we supposed to win this?" When in reality, look, I balanced out these fights. They are winnable. And even if they're not winnable, I promise you there's a way to get out of this. Just generally speaking, I think a lot of DMs out there want to run hard combats, but they are afraid of this reaction, because I see it constantly online too. Just look at the way people reacted to Critical Role Campaign 3. Spoilers for Critical Role Campaign 3, but in the back half of that show, one of the player characters did die fresh cut grass in a combat that was really, really tough. And people were pissed at Matt Mercer for running a hard combat, apparently not being aware that running a combat for 7 mid-level parties basically requires you to make ridiculously overpowered monsters, because for God's sakes, there are 7 player characters. Do you have any idea how hard that is to genuinely beat? Nonetheless, people were furious, insisting that Matt had created a bad D&D session and a bad combat, which is just idiotic. That response is the response that I and many other DMs are afraid of. 'Cause for God's sake, those people aren't even playing in Matt's game and they're mad. Look, I tell my players as soon as I can. Look, I tell my players early on, hey, this game is going to challenge you. And they can either choose to stay or choose to leave. And luckily, the vast majority of my players have chosen to stay. I've only had a couple problem players that gave me grief over having werewolves in Curse of Strahd, or having a monster that occasionally rolls a critical hit. Thankfully, that is not the norm. Look, I'm not saying that I balance all my combats perfectly. God, no. Some of them probably suck. But I am trying my best. And if I make a mistake, it's just that. A mistake. I'm not trying to adversarially kill you. I'm trying to create a challenging game that's fun for both of us, but that fun's lost the moment you start screaming at me. Okay, next up is actually something that prevents problem player stuff, and that is clearing up misunderstandings and general foolishness. Seriously, I love it when players do this. Look, like I said in that combat section, I make mistakes. Players make mistakes. We're human. It's normal. But the most important thing you can do is talk about, like, hey guys, how are we feeling about that thing that happened? One example that comes up off the top of my head is my sorcerer in my second D&D home game, now playing a paladin, but that's irrelevant. One specific situation that comes to my mind is my sorcerer in my second D&D campaign. They found out that there was a traitor in the ranks of their pirate crew, and kind of out of left field, he recommended a torture technique involving drowning that the rest of the players and myself were like, whoa, what the heck? It was a little bit crossing the line. Nothing NSFW necessarily, but it definitely wasn't something that would be found in a PG-13 rated movie, at least on screen. So I texted the guy about it and asked, like, hey, what was up with that? And he just said, I got a little bit uppity, I got a little bit excited, that was completely my bad, won't happen again. And then we moved on with our lives. But the important thing is the guy responded to my text and actually explained himself and then said, sorry. Look, talking about these things is so important in a D&D game. I know we say communicate all the time, but communication goes to so many different aspects of this game. I mean, you're playing with other people. You're communicating fundamentally all the time. But here, the specific communication I'm talking about is just openly discussing things that might be a bit uncomfortable. Like, there's nothing more frustrating than a player who ignores your text when you're asking them about stuff that happened in the game, especially if it's something that's eating at you. But my players have been great at responding to me and asking me questions about how I feel about the game too. Like, one time while running a game on my YouTube channel for viewers, I had the players openly discussing aspects of a combat that they didn't entirely enjoy. And that made the show way better because it allowed me to adjust what I was doing. Basically, if there's a problem, talk to your game master. If your game master feels there's a problem, respond to them trying to talk to you, because open communication is going to help these issues to go away way faster. And if you don't talk about it, well, these issues have a tendency to blow up. Like, seriously, we've seen it plenty of times before. Alright, next up on our problem player list. I hate when players center basically all of their D&D talk around themselves. Okay, I'm not talking about like just in the game. I'm talking about like D&D talk in general. Like outside the game. You know, the after session wrap up where you and your fellow players are talking about what happened in the game and stuff like that. I don't necessarily hate it when somebody can literally only talk about their character and never compliment anyone else's character, but it does kind of bother me. Like, as a DM, I love talking about my own performance, alright? What can I say? But I also want to give out compliments to the players. My campaign's usually combat heavy, so I basically always have some kind of combat thing to talk about. I compliment clever spell use. I compliment good use of teamwork. I compliment my players all the time because I want them to know that I appreciate them, and I want them to feel like they're actually making a difference in the game, because they are. But if I don't tell them that, they won't know. On the player end, if somebody's literally only talking about their character, not sharing the love around, I don't know, it feels kind of awkward, especially when they literally can't shut up about themselves. I had a problem player who didn't just do this like after session. I mean, anytime he wanted to talk about D&D just like in general, it was always centered around his character. He'd never, ever be caught dead complimenting anyone else, bringing up anyone else's character, anyone else's backstory. Hell, he barely even talked about my DMing. It was all just about his character. And look, I get it. We love our characters. That is normal. I expect that people are usually gonna talk about themselves. I talk about myself all the time. But spread the love around. It does feel weird, especially if the rest of the group are there, if you go on like a 10-minute tirade about just yourself and stuff involving just you. Okay, last up on the love list, and that is when players think about my combat balance and actually build their characters around it. Like I said, I run challenging games, but my games aren't like Tomb of Horrors. So I don't need my players to like create a gotcha build that will absolutely make me as the DM cry. Like, I don't want people to create characters specifically around some super complex multi-class. I want you to create a character that you are going to love, but at the same time, I want that character to be as optimized as is reasonable. My home game party have been really good about picking spells that they both enjoy, but also spells that make sense for the games I'm running. I always prioritize movement, like being able to move throughout the battlefield, teleportation especially. Those things are so key in every single fight I run. My players have thought about that. They've thought about that and spread their magic items appropriately so that people are able to teleport or get bonus movement. But at the same time, my warlock isn't multi-classing into paladin for no reason just so that he can create a darkness warlock paladin multi-crit.
1 hour later.
Now, to be clear, I don't have a problem with those builds intrinsically, but they just don't really fit in the balance of my game. I don't want to balance everything around one player character, but at the same time, I don't want to instantly smush everyone in my party because they created wizards with negative intellect. My players don't have that problem. They found the sweet spot, and frankly, it wasn't hard for them to find because they paid attention in my session 0. They listened to what I was saying, and that makes me feel good. There is not a single person on this planet who doesn't care about being heard. We all love being listened to, man. So as a DM, when I know my players are listening to me talk about my combat balance, hearing me out, and then building their characters appropriately, darn, it just makes me feel so good. All right, last up on the haters list. I really don't love it when a player fights my lore at every single turn, or worse, make stuff up. Look, I like it when people come up with their own ideas, but make sure to run them by me and listen to me when I'm trying to talk about the lore of this world. Like, if I say, hey, elves are really rare in this part of the world, you can't immediately turn around and go, oh man, I found these elven ruins next door. Like, no, you didn't. What are you talking about? It sounds silly, but it has been an issue in a few campaigns. And this isn't really like a hate. It's more like a pet peeve. I don't mind it when somebody's just like yapping off magic stuff and none of it really makes sense for my world. I mean, come on, that doesn't really matter. But if somebody makes it a habit to make up and fabricate information, to habitually ignore every single time I try to explain anything about my world, it does kind of put a damper on the effort that I put into making that world. I have a Google Doc that's like 50,000 words long. I love my homebrew world, and I do not expect my players to love my world as much as I do. That's an unreasonable expectation, but I do like it when my players pay attention. I mean, I love it when my players fill in the blanks with information that they learned previously in the campaign. It just shows they paid attention, and dang it, that just makes me straight up giddy. But when a player essentially shuts me out, it sucks, especially with all the effort that I put in. Look, I get it. When you're role-playing, you're just gonna say things. Like, Tritons don't exist in my world, for example. I'm not gonna get mad at a player for saying, hey, I met a Triton, because expecting them to intrinsically know that is ridiculous. However, after I tell you, like, hey, Tritons don't exist in this world, or hobgoblins aren't a thing in this world, don't get mad at me, and certainly don't fabricate information to contradict what I'm saying. I mean, I'm not gonna hate you for it, but it is gonna kind of bum me out. Buy into the DM's world. Listen to what they're saying, because, you know, you might learn some cool things. Your DM put a lot of effort into the world they built out, and who knows? You might fall in love with it just as much as they fall in love creating it. This one was pretty personal to me, though I hope you guys enjoyed it anyway. If you guys did, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of our content, check out our main channel. We've got lots of D&D tales and tea over there. Or you can check out our previous episode of D&D Advice, where we talked about some very disappointing min-maxer builds. Yeah, linked in the cards. But before you go, please leave a comment on this video. And if you can't leave a comment, leave a comment with your own personal D&D pet peeve or your own personal D&D love. Preferably both. But in any case, in essence, like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you all next time. Farewell. You hadn't thought about that thing before. Or maybe... And I think that is